In a museum in France, you will find an interesting sight. Suspended from the ceiling is something that looks like it came straight from the pages of a steampunk novel. That is because it is a steam-powered aircraft, a romantic machine built by a romantic people, the French. Hello and welcome. I am Christopher Rex Emerson, collector of many strange aviation facts, and welcome to the first episode of my new A to Z series of flying machines, aircraft, and other things that try to go into the air. Most of them succeed, some don't. This is a new series of shorter videos that cover the history and design and general background of aircraft that interest me particularly. Now, because there are so many that I want to talk about, I've decided that I'm going to do this in an A to Z list. So each video will have a new topic from the alphabet, and we'll cycle through them as we go. Kicking off with the letter A, we have the Ader Avion III. This is such a beautiful machine, and it's so typical of those early, strange contraptions that dominate the history of the pioneering days of lighter-than-air and heavier-than-air flight. It was a steam-powered flying machine built by a Frenchman by the name of Clément Ader between 1892 and 1897. Clément Ader was a fascinating but controversial figure. Born on the 2nd of April 1841, he was a gifted engineer and inventor. He improved on the telephone that was invented by Alexander Graham Bell. He established the first telephone network in France, and he invented this thing called the theatrophone. This was a device that allowed people to listen to live opera and theatre performances through telephone lines with stereo sound in the late 1800s. It was fascinating. Unfortunately, he later developed a tendency and a reputation for sensationalist claims and revisionism. This has tarnished his reputation as one of the great inventors of his era. Ader became interested in aviation in the 1870s, and in 1882 he began constructing his first flying machine, which was eventually completed in 1890. It was called the Éole. Now, this thing was a beautiful example of something called mimetic design, where man-made technology mimics nature. The aircraft featured a set of bat-like monoplane wings. In this case, Ader modeled them off a fruit bat. Looking at an 1890 patent for an almost identical design, we can see that the wings were a single surface with a steep canopied curvature, and they could be folded for storage. That is because the skeleton of these wings was in fact a complex mechanical structure. The wings were a system of rods and joints which allowed for a multiplicity of movements, including a type of swing wing movement. The pilot could adjust the wing area, the camber, and the incidence independently using 6 hand cranks and 2 foot pedals. It was an incredibly complex, incredibly user-unfriendly, but truly beautiful piece of engineering. It was also steam-powered. The Éole was powered by a remarkably lightweight 20 horsepower alcohol-burning compound steam engine of Ader's own design. The engine featured a vertically mounted, inverted cylinder arrangement. It used a multi-tubular boiler mounted amidships, and a prominent external condenser which was located above the fuselage to recycle the steam. The total power units for the Éole, including the engine, the boiler, and the condenser, weighed just 50 kilograms, delivering 20 horsepower at 600 RPM. This drove a single 4-blade tractor propeller, approximately 2 meters in diameter, which was mounted at the front. The blades were built out of flexible sections of bamboo and shaped to resemble the feathers you would find on a bird. The whole aircraft had a gross weight of approximately 330 kilograms, including the pilot, and it had a wingspan of 14 meters and a length of approximately 6.5 meters. The pilot sat upon a rudimentary seat in a sort of cradle underneath the wings, and the whole thing sat atop a 3-wheeled undercarriage with a 4th smaller wheel at the nose to prevent the aircraft from tipping over. Despite looking like something that came out of a early 20th century science fiction book, the Éole is somewhat significant because it has the historical distinction, depending on who you listen to, of being the first heavier-than-air machine to take off under its own power, carrying a man. On October the 9th, 1890, the Éole completed a 50-meter flight at a height of about 20 centimeters. Now, I say flight in the loosest possible terms because there was no real control. It was essentially a glorified hop that was achieved by basic lift and aided by ground effect. And a lot of people over the years have taken great artistic license about the history of this particular event. Most sketches and drawings depicting it show the Éole achieving an altitude far greater than what it actually did. It did achieve the first powered liftoff, but it was in no way the first powered and controlled flight. The Éole lacked pitch control, it lacked roll control, it lacked yaw control. It provided the pilots with no effective means to control the direction of flight at all, and even if it could provide some rudimentary directional control, it was damn near impossible to see out of, as the only way to observe the outside world was to look at the two round holes that were cut into the side of the compartment holding the pilot. There was no forward visibility at all. However, Ader's flying machine had still managed to lift itself off the ground, and because of this, there was now official interest in his work being expressed by the French Ministry of War. In 1892, the government provided Ader with a large subsidy of 650,000 francs to further fund his development. Now, by this point, construction had already begun on a new machine called the Avion II, but it was abandoned after receiving these funds in favor of a new design called the Avion III. Built between 1892 and 1897, it was a more advanced development of his earlier flying machine, the Éole. It was a twin-engine tractor monoplane that retained the signature bat-like wing design, but introduced significant mechanical and control improvements. It was powered by two horizontally mounted 20-horsepower compound steam engines, of a very similar design to that installed on the Éole. These were fed by a single multi-tubular alcohol-fired boiler, which provided steam at approximately 140 pounds per square inch. Like the Éole, it also featured a prominent external condenser. This power system was now used to drive two 4-bladed air screws made out of flexible bamboo, and to save space and to allow the power plant to be installed in a compact location, the propeller arcs overlapped, with the starboard screw positioned slightly ahead of the port screw. Now, the wings on this design were a lot less complex. The various adjustable wing movements of the Éole were reduced to a single swing wing element. This was meant to shift the wings forward and backwards to adjust to the center of lift relative to the center of gravity, which was meant to provide a crude form of pitch control. It was operated by a hand crank in the cockpit, but operate is a strong word, as it required 20 to 30 full turns to effect any sort of significant change in wing position, which meant that the pitch control was hypothetical, not actually possible. But, more importantly, and with a bit more success, the Avion III actually had some level of yaw control at least. Ader included a small vertical rudder which was operated by two foot pedals. This was located beneath the wing and behind the pilot. Supplementing this, the pilot could also make use of differential propulsion, which was achieved by varying the relative speeds of the two independent engines, which would provide more thrust to one air screw over the other, which would impart a yawing movement. So this thing is slightly more advanced than the Éole, and it appears to have a bit more level of control compared to the Éole, but did it ever get off the ground? Was it successful? Probably not. Due to the ministry's heavy investment, the aircraft's testing in 1897 was a formal event conducted in strict secrecy. Nothing more was said about it until 1906, 9 years later. Following the successful public flights that were being conducted by the Wright brothers, Ader started making claims that he had achieved the first successful flight in 1897 using the Avion III, which supposedly flew for a distance of up to 300 meters. Now, this could not be substantiated, as the military report of the flight was classified as a secret document. However, Clément Ader and several witnesses repeated his claim in numerous interviews, and they are featured in several French magazines from the period. Also at around the same time, either in late 1906 or possibly early 1907, Ader also made unsubstantiated claims regarding his earlier aircraft, the Éole, asserting that it had flown a second time, covering at least 100 meters in 1891. Apparently, the claims were convincing, because in 1909, the Avion III was put on display at the first Salon Aeronautique in Paris, which became known as the Paris Aero Show. But as it turned out, Ader's claims about the Avion III and his other claims about the Éole were a pack of lies. The official military report on the Avion III trials was finally released to the public in November of 1910. Written by Lieutenant General H. Manzia, it confirmed that the Avion III never flew. It taxied around a circular track, it attempted to take off, and it failed. Apparently, it was caught by a gust of wind and thrown off track, slightly damaged, and an attempt was never made again. Following this, the War Ministry lost interest in Ader's flying machine and his other development work, and decided to provide no more funding. That's why he was making these sensationalist claims. He was trying to drum up fresh support and secure more funding to develop another flying machine. The Avion III was expensive to produce, and most of it was funded by the military. If he wanted to continue, he would need new funds. Unfortunately, he would never do so. Clément Ader built no more flying machines. He was never able to get the support or raise enough funds to do so. It was not helped by the fact that he had been proven to be a barefaced liar. However, not long before all of this came to the surface, he published an excellent book in 1909 called L'Aviation-Militaire, which basically titles Military Aviation. In this book, he made several correct predictions about the future of aerial warfare, and he anticipated the design of the fleet aircraft carrier with near prophetic accuracy. He predicted the requirement for a flush deck that is clear of all obstacles. He predicted the requirements for the stowage of aircraft below decks, the use of elevators to bring the aircraft up to the flight deck, and even the technique of landing back aboard a carrier. The book is a fantastic read, so if you can get a hand on a copy of it, I highly recommend it. He was a brilliant, far-sighted man, but his ambitions had gotten the best of him, and his reputation for factual invention never properly recovered. For one reason or another, Ader eventually destroyed much of his early works, including the Éole, but the Avion III survived. Following its trials in 1897, the Avion III became the property of the French War Ministry. After a period of time set in storage, it was eventually donated to the Museum of Arts and Crafts in Paris, where it can be found to this day. And that is a brief account of Clément Ader and his steam-powered aircraft. If you want to learn more about this sort of stuff, please leave a comment down below. And in this horrible age of AI-generated slop on YouTube, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel so that creators who are actual human beings get promoted by the algorithm so that we can continue to do what we love. But this has been the first episode of my A to Z of aircraft. What horrors await us next? Who knows? But regardless, I will catch you all next time. Goodbye.